I was in Salt Lake City, Utah a few weeks ago to check out Stadler's new North American factory. And when I was there, I used the transit, of course. In fact, I used it quite a lot. And what I saw was a bright spot. The United States, for better or for worse, does not have a reputation for good public transportation. But I found the system in Salt Lake City to be perfectly pleasant, if not actually perfect. So let's talk about what I think is some of the best public transportation that exists in a small North American city, and what your city might actually be able to learn. Hey there, if you're new here, my name is Reece, and this is RMTransit, a channel about public transportation systems here in North America and around the world. If you like this type of video about public transit, well, there is a like button down below, and if you enjoy this video and want to see more, then consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon. Getting into downtown after flying into Salt Lake was really easy. And the passenger experience was honestly excellent. I wanted to be able to walk straight out of the airport terminal and onto a train, and so I was able to download the UTA app, that's the Utah Transit Authority, and just buy a ticket right on there, and once I'd done that, I just validated it, and I was good to go to get on the train. That I was able to just pay for a transit trip on a frequent electric train to the airport on my phone is something people probably imagine isn't very common in American cities, but it was pretty great. Now I should mention that the Salt Lake City airport is brand new, but they do a pretty subpar job of actually connecting you with the light rail. There are signs to the public transportation / light rail, but they use a smaller font than the other transportation options. It's almost as if they're embarrassed that their airport has an electric rail connection, which makes me wonder if the management of this airport has ever traveled overseas, where having an electric rail connection is seen as a positive, not something to be embarrassed about. And it's even nicer because UTA provides a really good service, as I'm going to be talking about in the rest of this video. I'll also say that the actual location of the light rail station is just kind of weird. You knew that you were going to put rail in this airport. There was rail at the previous iteration of this airport, and when it was completely redesigned, they decided to put it off in a corner under an overpass. It's just not great. Salt Lake City is often a cold place, and putting the trains inside the terminal in an easily accessible place for passengers would have been way better, and this is a big design fail. Things did feel a lot better when my train actually arrived on time though, and the Siemens S70s that Trax uses on its newer light rail trains are excellent. I really appreciated the seating material, which reminds me of Vancouver. It's soft like fabric, but easy to wipe like plastic. I'll also say that when you are actually on vehicles on the system, the UTA seems to do a pretty good job. Vehicles were clean, punctual, and the employees were just really nice. I saw more than one bus driver or light rail operator helping a passenger in need. And even better, nobody yelled at me for filming the trains and buses, which is a win in my book. All in all, it's pretty clear that this is a system that operators take a lot of pride in. Riding around the system, it is impressive that this city manages over 50 light rail stops on around 75 kilometers of track. That's more than Calgary or Edmonton, despite the fact that Salt Lake City is a smaller city. And while the network isn't super fancy, there's not a lot of elevated guideways or tunnels, it gets you where you need to go generally. Though I will say the track felt quite bumpy in a few places. More importantly though, frequency was actually really good, and I think places like Denver could learn a ton from Salt Lake City here. Especially in core or interlined areas of the network, trains were coming by every couple of minutes, and that was awesome to see. There's also the Front Runner regional rail service, which looks a lot like GO Transit in Toronto, with MPI locomotives and Bombardier bi-level coaches. But it actually manages level boarding, which as far as I know is unique for the Bombardier bi-levels and something Toronto could learn a lot from. You don't need to step up to get onto the train, which makes boarding faster, and people with wheelchairs or strollers can get in via any door. Frontrunner is nearly 150 kilometers long, running from Ogden, which is north of Salt Lake City, down south to Provo, which is to the south. And if you didn't already know, UTA has done a really good job planning incremental upgrades to the service over the years, so it's been enhanced and enhanced and enhanced. And there are plans in the long term to move to more frequent all-day service, which already exists, albeit at somewhat low frequencies. Something you will notice in Salt Lake City is that, like London with TfL or like Vancouver with TransLink, all of the transit services are basically under the UTA brand, which is a really nice piece of integration. You'll also see physical integration, where there's quite a few places where buses, light rail, and regional rail all come together, such as at Salt Lake Central and the very nicely designed interchange at North Temple, where there's a 10-meter wide regional rail platform Again, something places like Toronto could learn a lot from. There's also the S-Line streetcar, which locals make fun of because, well, it doesn't actually operate on the street. But I've got to say, I love this line. Trust me, as someone who spent a lot of time in Toronto, a city with a lot of streetcars not being on the street is a feature, not a bug. And the use of the same Siemens LRVs on the streetcar line as on the rest of the light rail network is really smart operational practice, so you get economies of scale with maintenance. I'll also say, with the nice routing that is off-street behind houses, industrial spaces, landing you at Sugar House with all of its cool mixed-use development, and quite a bit of single track, reminds me of one of the cool tram lines in Tokyo that, again, are mostly off-street. Or with all that single track, perhaps some sort of Swiss interurban line. It's just really quite cool. One thing I noticed coming into the city the first night, quite late in the evening, is just how busy the train was. It sort of felt unremarkable, and since I was coming from Toronto, a city which is over 8 times larger than Salt Lake, and which people would probably imagine has way better transit, that was really quite impressive. It's a really big endorsement of the UTA that even late at night on a weekday, I was able to catch a train from the airport quickly, and it was busy. As I said before, the wayfinding on the system is also really good. This is unusual for a rather small transit system where you often see maps that look like they were made in Microsoft Paint, but everything here is quite classy. Again, there's a lot that other transit agencies could learn here. Even the design of the livery on the buses and trains just looks great with its red, white, and blue. Kind of reminds me of one of those popsicles. And now, I know a lot of people don't like ads on their trains and buses. I don't either, especially when it blocks my view out of the windows. But UTA seemed to do this actually pretty well. The ads integrate quite nicely into the livery, where the center part is replaced with ad, but the ends of the train maintain their ad-free status, and the ad doesn't actually cover the windows. So good job on that too. The schedules were also really nicely designed, aesthetically, but also they were easier to understand than the ones I'm used to in Toronto with GO Transit and the TTC. I actually found myself getting back to Toronto and wondering when I could go back to Utah. Salt Lake also even has a downtown free fare zone, like Calgary, which means that you can use the frequent portion of the light rail that runs through the downtown core to travel back and forth between a lot of the nice destinations. And I actually used that free fare zone a couple of times to head up to the very interesting Temple Square and City Creek Mall, which is so nicely designed. Really an underappreciated piece of urban/mall design. Now, I will say that based on the service on some of the bus routes, as well as the, let's call it, minimalist design of a lot of these stops and stations, it's pretty clear that UTA kind of operates on a shoestring budget. But they really pull things together. Again, services were operating on time, they were pretty quick, the vehicles were clean, everything just sort of worked. It sort of did remind me of a place like Switzerland, if with slightly less nice trains. Of course, the transit situation is not perfect. There is that bad airport connection, but then there's also an increasing amount of job sprawl. If politicians and planners want the transit system to succeed and want to spend less tax dollars expanding roads and parking, then they should really focus on trying to keep office and high-density residential development on the rail network. And new industrial areas that are popping up, places like where we saw the Stadler factory, should get a lot more express bus service to the rest of the city. I also have to say that the big service cutbacks on Sundays are just silly. Do people going to places of worship just teleport there? Back in the day, Toronto used to even stop its streetcars in front of churches on Sunday so that people could get to their destinations. Transit should be treated like water or electricity. You don't not want water or electricity on Sundays, you also need transit. What's clear though is that there's a lot of potential here in Salt Lake, and a few major projects, which are already kind of being thought about, could take things up a notch. Frontrunner clearly has huge potential, and it's actually already one of the best regional rail services in the United States outside of the Northeast, and so the plans to improve it, which are good, should be accelerated. The line is an obvious candidate for electrification, and Stadler will literally build you the trains in town. In the meantime, you could order Fleurs, which would also be an improvement over the okay Bombardier bilevels, and that would be something you could do tomorrow without waiting for electrification. You'd even have level boarding thanks to, well, the level boarding at the existing bilevels. There should also just be a lot more transit-oriented development. It's good to see a lot of 5/1s all over the place, but at major interchanges like, say, Salt Lake Central, put up some high-rises and put the bus and train terminal underground, or at least under development. That would be really nice, it would enclose passengers, and it would mean more funds for UTA to spend on better stations elsewhere. I'll also say that it would be awesome to just have more shops and services at a place like Salt Lake Central, because right now it just kind of feels like a transport interchange rather than a place that you might just go to get some food or other services. I'll also say that there's huge potential at this location to have direct ramps from the bus terminal onto the nearby interstate, so you could have express buses that never have to operate on a local street, taking you from place to place. This could actually be a really cool place to operate, say, a 24-hour service to the airport, so you could have buses overnight and rail during the day. There's also talk of a super long gondola route to Snowbird and Alta, which are great ski hills, by the way. But let me give you my 2 cents. I love gondolas as much as the next person, but come on, build a rail line. It would be so cool to have electric rail to a ski hill, and that would be the first case of it in North America. It would be more complex, it would be more expensive, but it would be more awesome. Picture this, the RMTransit solution, if you will. A new light rail line operating from historic Sandy Station east on 90 South, 94 South, and Little Cottonwood Road into the Cottonwood Canyon and up to the ski hills. You could still have lots of park and rides for people who insist on driving, but because of the long gaps between stations and the fact that you don't need to operate a train every 5 minutes, you could have a lot of single track, which would bring down the cost. Sort of like the Sugar House streetcar line, but much bigger. This would mean a solution fully integrated into the UTA, and there would be actually economies of scale in operating it because, like the Sugar House streetcar line, you could use very similar vehicles to the rest of the light rail network. And during peak periods, you could potentially even operate direct services from the downtown hotels or perhaps even the airport straight to the ski hills, meaning a seamless one-seat ride for all of those skiers who don't want to drive and pollute the environment. Circling back to facilities, I would just generally support enclosing more of the facilities on the UTA network, better bus shelters, larger bus shelters, and bus terminals at key interchange points. That would help people in winter not freeze, but it would also mean people in summer could stay out of the hot sun, and people could stay out of the sometimes polluted Salt Lake air. I'd also just generally suggest giving the UTA more funds so they can operate more service. During the All-Star Weekend period, they operated quite a lot for a city of Salt Lake's size, and it would be great if they could just do that all of the time. Clearly they have the operations capabilities, they keep the system clean, it's operated really well, just give them more funding so they can run more transit service. Ultimately, I think with all of these changes, enhanced frontrunner, a proper rail solution to the ski hills, better service, and better integrated stops, especially at the airport, Salt Lake City could have what is probably one of the best transit systems in North America. UTA does wonders with what they have today, so give them more funding and let them create what is the best transit system in America. Thanks for watching.